with that Dark Knight opener?
Dark Knight's a
Dark
disgusting,
Knight's
man.
powerful,
fuck
bro.
up.
That's crazy.
He's above you, man.
I'm not critting, man.
He's definitely above you. That's crazy.
Knight opener is busted.
I quit. Bro, I don't like the fact that these fucking tanks are. Stop! Eat shit!
Dark Knight's opener is just nutty, man.
Hey everyone, I'm Aim Showtime, aka Zero Shift from Gilgamesh. In this video, I'll show you how to effectively tank with Dark Knight and high-end content. Dark Knight outputs the highest amount of damage amongst all 4 tanks, and is one of the busiest jobs while under your burst. This makes it extremely fun to play in my opinion. Although it lacks in the self-healing department, it still packs it in on the defensive end with raw mitigation. Get ready to bring the pain with this class. Let's get started. Let's get things started with your basic combos. Your standard combo is Hard Slash, Siphon Strike, and Soul Eater. Siphon Strike restores 600 MP, and Soul Eater regenerates health and gives you 20 blood gauge. Your AoE combo is Unleash and Stalwart Soul. Stalwart Soul restores 600 MP and also gives you 20 blood gauge. This combo is a gain on 2 or more targets. Now for your blood gauge actions. You have 3 of them: Blood Spiller, Quietus, and Living Shadow. All cost 50 blood gauge each. Living Shadow summons your buddy as Steam. After a slow summon time, he begins dealing damage to the boss for 24 seconds. Make sure you always have 50 gauge to spend to activate Living Shadow on cooldown every 2 minutes. Blood Spiller is a single target damage ability, and Quietus is your AoE damage ability. Use Quietus over Blood Spiller on 3 or more targets. Blood Weapon. Blood Weapon increases your blood gauge by 10 and restores 600 MP each time you land a GCD. Note that it doesn't stack while hitting multiple targets with one attack. Blood Weapon lasts for 10 seconds, so you want to get 5 GCDs under this buff. Because of this, it's important you run a skill speed that allows you to get all 5 GCDs, because the timing to get all of them is extremely tight. 2.4 to 2.43 skill speed is what works for me. If you manage to get all 5 hits, then it'll restore a total of 3000 MP, which I'll explain why that is important during the rotation section of this video. Off global cooldowns. Let's start with the 2 GCDs that cost mana. You have Edge of Shadow and Flood of Shadow. Both cost 3000 MP each. Flood of Shadow is a line AoE, and Edge of Shadow is a single target hit. Upon use, you gain a damage buff called Dark Side for 30 seconds. You can extend the timer to a maximum of 60 seconds. It's important you activate Dark Side right at the beginning of a fight, and you must keep this active for the rest of its duration. Don't worry, it'll be very simple if you follow your rotation, and I will show you how later in this video. Use Flood of Shadow over Edge of Shadow on 3 or more targets. Otherwise, use Edge. Next up, we have Abyssal Drain and Carve and Spit. Both share a cooldown with each other. Use Abyssal Drain over Carve and Spit on 4 or more targets. Otherwise, use Carve and Spit. Abyssal Drain is an AoE attack that restores your HP for each enemy it hits. Carve and Spit restores 600 MP when used. Plunge is your gap closer. You have 2 charges of it. Salted Earth creates a circle AoE around you that deals damage to any enemy who steps in it. This skill also unlocks Salt and Darkness. When activated, Salt and Darkness deals a 500 potency hit to enemies in your Salted Earth. Next up is Delirium. Upon use, you gain 3 stacks of Delirium for 15 seconds. Each stack lets you use either Blood Spiller or Quietus free of cost. Lastly is Shadowbringer. This skill cannot be activated without Dark Side active. Shadowbringer is a line AoE and is your strongest potency hit. You have 2 charges. Both charges should be spent during the opener and every 2-minute burst. Alright, now let's get started with the opener. Alright, before we begin this portion, I'm going to make a disclaimer. The opener I use is not the opener from the balance. I use this because it's consistent, still under buffs, and high DPS. I also always main tank, therefore I always pull with Unmend. If you want to face pull, by all means do it. The DPS gain is minimal, and even I do it if I'm off tank. But pulling with Unmend is more consistent and makes boss positioning better, which makes the party's life easier. To me, that's more important than your parse. I will lay out both openers for main tank and off tank with the pre-pull TBN and the Edge of Shadow variation for both. For main tank, both these variations use Unmend to pull. The TBN pre-pull opener looks like this. The Edge variation, where your TBN will not break, looks like this. You simply use Edge of Shadow after Unmend, then weave Blood Weapon. The rest is the same. So we're going to begin with the pre-pull TBN at 2 seconds. If you are main tank, place this on yourself. If not, then place it on the tank pulling. The reason for doing this is because we need to use blood weapon as soon as we engage so that we can get 50 blood gauge as fast as possible to summon a steam. So to prevent overcapping on MP, we use TBN pre-pull. If your TBN will not break in the beginning, however, you unmend pull and use an Edge of Shadow to dump MP instead. Then use blood weapon on your second weave. For off tank, you can choose to pull with unmend or face pull. Here is the TBN pre-pull opener with a face pull. When you face pull here, you're going to activate TBN 2 seconds pre-pull and use blood weapon about after 1 second pre-pull. This pull is a little bit more advanced because if you aren't comfortable with the timing, you may mistime your blood weapon or early pull the boss. You must be able to read the countdown correctly. The fight begins when start appears on the center of your screen. So that's the time your hard slash should hit the boss. You hard slash the boss, then activate Edge of Shadow and weave blood weapon after. Your living shadow will come up 1 GCD later than the other openers. If you use unmend, the opener is the same as the main tank variation. The common factor for all these openers is the early blood weapon to get living shadow out fast. Pot after Siphon Strike. Delirium allows for early activation as well because stacks are only consumed for Blood Spiller and Quietus. All these openers align with raid buffs. Dump your MP and OGCDs here. Weave Edge of Shadow after each OGCD. Shadowbringer has first priority here to get your first charge on cooldown. Don't think too much about the order, as long as you dump everything under buffs. The goal here is to get 6 Edge of Shadows. If you miss your 5th GCD under Blood Weapon, you may miss that 6th Edge of Shadow at the very end. If you must TBN for a tank buster during your burst, simply just spend the Dark Arts ASAP. The beauty of Dark Knight is the amount of damage they contribute to raid buffs with their versatility. With practice, you'll be able to output some serious numbers. Choose the opener that's right for you. Now let's talk about your rotation and setting up your burst windows. The rotation that follows the opener is simple. You essentially just Soul Eater combo for most of it, but there are key things you must follow. Use your Salted Earth, Carbon Spit, and Delirium on cooldown. Hold both your charges of Shadowbringer for your 2-minute burst. Hold both charges of Plunge for every 1 minute and 2-minute burst. Use Blood Spiller under buffs or to prevent overcapping on your blood gauge. Also note that in your rotation, Blood Weapon and Delirium will overlap, so to keep your blood gauge from overcapping, simply use a Blood Spiller to dump 50 gauge before you use Delirium. Save your Edge of Shadows for buffs, or use it to prevent overcapping on MP and to prevent Darkside from falling off. After the opener only, delay the use of Blood Weapon by 3 GCDs to align your 1 minute and 2-minute bursts. This is a key step as it aligns your Blood Weapon with raid buffs and prevents you from overcapping on MP and wasting an Edge of Shadow before raid buffs come out. You can then use Blood Weapon on cooldown the rest of the encounter. Now let's go over your burst windows. You have your 1-minute burst and your 2-minute burst. Your 2-minute bursts are your strongest because Living Shadow comes off cooldown and the party's raid buffs are backup. Because of this logic, you naturally want to spend more of your damage in your 2-minute burst than your 1-minute burst. Use your own cooldowns as a reference. Blood Weapon coming back, Living Shadow still on cooldown, it's a 1-minute burst. Living Shadow coming up, it's a 2-minute burst. The simple way of doing Dark Knight's burst is to just dump mana every burst window until you have 3000 MP remaining to save for TBN to use defensively. The advanced way is definitely more tricky, but outputs way more damage. So listen up, pay attention to this. This section will take more practice. Remember this rule, 6-2 and 5-3. This refers to the number of Edge of Shadows you spend. The number on the left is how many you should spend during your 2-minute window, and the number on the right is what you spend during your 1-minute window. 6-2, however, refers to the opener, because we get 6 Edge of Shadows instead of 5. So that means we only use 2 Edge of Shadows in the next 1-minute burst. If you did not get 6 Edge of Shadows, just do 5-3 instead. We will primarily be doing the 5-3 rule. How is it possible to get 5 Edge of Shadows? Normally under full MP, you can only get 3 Edge of Shadows off anyway. So where do you get the other 2 edges? Simple, TBN and Blood Weapon are the key. Blood Weapon restores 3000 MP if you hit all 5 GCDs under it, which is 1 Edge of Shadow. This is why you delay Blood Weapon after the opener. If you use it on cooldown, you will overcap on MP before your burst window starts, because we use Blood Weapon so early in the opener. If you delay it, you gain that MP while your burst is happening, gaining you that Edge of Shadow under raid buff. The 5th Edge of Shadow comes from Dark Dark Arts, which procs when TBN is broken. Somewhere in between your 1 minute and 2 minute windows, you basically try to get TBN to break to save that Dark Arts. This is possible if you TBN during AoEs, tank busters, or heavy auto attack phases. A common mistake from Dark Knights is never using their mana. Performing these burst windows correctly will ensure your dark side buff never falls off and will ensure you keep high DPS. This concludes the offensive portion of Dark Knight, which was a lot. Now onto your defensive kit.
3, 2, 1.
Dark Knight lacks the self-healing that other tanks have, but still has more than enough raw mitigation to eat damage from raid bosses this tier. The Blackest Night. It's Dark Knight's strongest mitigation tool. It costs 3000 MP and it places a shield that's 25% of your max HP onto you or a party member. It lasts for 7 seconds and is on a short cooldown. When the shield breaks, you gain a Dark Arts proc, which refunds you that 3000 MP by letting you spend an Edge of Shadow or Flood of Shadow free of cost. This proc lasts forever until you use it. If TBN can be used to save party members, then that takes priority over your own damage. It also takes priority defensively, especially if you are not comfortable with an encounter and how to spread your cooldowns in that fight. If you must use TBN during a burst window, and it will happen, use the TBN over Edge of Shadow. Just spend the Dark Arts you get immediately afterwards. Shadow Wall is your 30% mitigation tool and lasts 15 seconds. Rampart is your standard tank roll cooldown that lasts 20 seconds. Dark Mind mitigates magic damage by 20% for 10 seconds. Don't worry, many tank busters and AoEs this tier are magic damage, with the exception of the P1S boss's Heavy Hand Tank Buster and Wandering AoE. Those are physical damage. Auto attacks are also generally physical damage as well. Oblation is a 10% mitigation tool that lasts 10 seconds and can be used either on yourself or a party member. You get 2 charges of it. You can use this as needed since there are 2 charges, making this cooldown easy to pair with other defensive mitigation and as a free mitigation tool for auto attacks. Dark Missionary is your raid-wide mitigation tool. It mitigates the party from magical damage by 10% for 15 seconds. This is very helpful for mitigating incoming consecutive raid-wide hits. Pairing your cooldowns for tank busters. For the first set, I like to use Shadow Wall, TBN, and Oblation. For my second set, I like to use Rampart, Dark Mind if it's magical, with TBN and Oblation. Get the most out of these cooldowns. Double dipping with Dark Knight is more intuitive since you don't have any self-healing, so learning how to mitigate properly is very important. For example, for P3S, you can use Shadow Wall to mitigate the first couple auto attacks as well as the first raid AoE. Then when the buster comes out, Shadow Wall is still active. And for P4S, phase 2, after Act 3, when you take the Near Far Buster and the Bleed, you can use Shadow Wall and TBN preemptively here after the Earthshakers. And toward the end of that Near Far Buster cast, you use Rampart. Rampart will help cover this first Buster, and it will go on to the Bleed Buster as well. When the Bleed Buster comes out, you can use Dark Mind with another TBN and Oblation. These are just some examples. Learning to do this goes a long way with Dark Knight, and will separate you from the meme that Dark Knight is squishy. Now let's go over your invuln. Living Dead. How do I describe this invuln?
Oh, hi, thanks for checking in. I'm still a piece of garbage.
Let's face it, it's no secret that Living Dead is a horrible invuln. You get a debuff called Living Dead for 10 seconds, and if you die while this debuff is active, instead of dying, you gain a Walking Dead debuff. Walking Dead prevents your HP from dropping below 1 for 10 seconds. However, you will die when the Walking Dead timer expires. To prevent this, you must have 100% of your HP restored. What makes this invuln pretty shit is that now your life is not in your hands. It's in the hands of your healers. Granted, under a static setting, you can say that this invuln isn't so bad, especially with the White Mage because of Benediction, which fully heals the target to max HP. Other than that, pray while you're in Party Finder or just don't use it. No, you don't have to do anything. I'm dead! And this concludes my guide for Dark Knight. Thank you guys so much for your support. It makes me happy that you guys find my content helpful, whether it be watching my POVs or learning from the guides. I apologize that this took so long to upload. I have been busy with the career change and setting up my move to another state. I promise once I have more time, I'll start ramping things up. Please like, comment, and subscribe as it greatly helps me out. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Peace.